he was the person who created the app which downloaded all of the data for the Cambridge Analytica study. And he also tried to fit the statistical model. That's often less reported. He tried to fit the statistical model to the data. Now, I approached him quite early on to try and talk to him about things, and he wasn't very keen on talking to me at all. But then I told him about my research into the efficiency of algorithms, and suddenly he was extremely excited to talk to me because he said, that's exactly what happened. We collected in all of this data, and it just didn't work. We got terrible results. And so he was talking about correlation levels of 0.1, so extremely bad results. So the story doesn't start with maths and science, but it starts right here in London, and it starts with graffiti. This is a painting by the graffiti artist Banksy, and it can be found actually only 100 meters from here. So you can go and look at it after the talk. It's just up the road. You just go up and turn left, or you probably have to search on Google, and you'll be able to find this work. And the title of this work is Shop Until You Drop. And it's painted on the side, it's painted right in the center, as you know. This is the shopping center of London. So it's on round Bond Street, Oxford Street. And like all of Banksy's art, it tries to illustrate the hypocrisy in society, that it was painted just in the lead up to Christmas, so the Christmas shopping rush, and showing how we're falling, I suppose this is the idea, she's falling into more and more consumerism. So how does Banksy's art work? Well, a lot of it is about positioning. It's about the spatial positioning of where he painted it. Painting it right in the center of London really has the effect. And it was this idea of positioning where the art is located which attracted the attention of some spatial statisticians. And it's here where the mathematics came in. What these statisticians did is that they thought that they could try and identify the real Banksy. The key to Banksy's success is that nobody has ever found out who the true Banksy is. And so what the spatial statisticians did is they took all of Banksy's works of art. Each of these red dots is a GPS recording of the point that he's produced some art around London. They did this both in London and they did it in Bristol, where his art was first found. And they produced what we call a heat map, showing the likely location of where Banksy lives, assuming he does his art nearer to where he lives. So the white areas here, these are the hotspots that he's likely to live in. The darker, redder areas are the places that he's less likely to live in. And the statisticians, they had some locations that they thought he might live in, these blue dots here, and they thought that they could narrow it down a little bit more using this mathematical model. So it was this mathematical model that made me start thinking a little bit more about my own life and what I do in mathematics. So when I first read the paper, I was really excited. I thought, this is really cool. This is really nice use of mathematics. It's just the type of thing that I'd have liked to do myself. If you're an academic yourself, you'll know that when academics see something else that another academic has done, they get both really excited and they also get a bit jealous, like, I wish I'd done that in the first place. And that's exactly how I felt. I felt like jealous and excited that they'd done this. But as I thought a little bit more, I started to think, who do these people think they are? I like Banksy, and I like all of this painting, and I like this idea of him sneaking through the night, doing his graffiti artwork, and you wake up in the morning and you see the hypocrisy of our society revealed. I really like that idea. And then you have these sort of smart-ass statisticians saying, oh, well, there's this heat map, and this is where he lives. And I started to get a little bit annoyed about it. And then another thing struck me. Oh, wait a minute. You're a professor of applied mathematics. you've written a book about socomatics. Aren't you just as bad as these spatial statisticians? And it was also at this time, as Jordan mentioned, I'd written this book, Socomatics, and this was the sort of typical picture that I was drawing at the time. What this is a football pitch. It's the penalty area. This is the goal. And this is a heat map which I produced of the probability of scoring a goal at different positions around the pitch. So in my heat map, black gives you a very high probability of scoring if you shoot from there. Yellow is a much lower probability of scoring. And so these were the sorts of things that I was really excited about at the time. And I'd written the book, and I was telling journalists all about this exciting new world of mathematical football. And for a large extent, journalists thought this was really interesting, and I got lots of requests to do interviews. And when I did the interviews, they'd all say, yes, yeah, that sounds interesting. But they'd always say, like at the end, they'd say, yeah, there's something, though, that we really need to ask you, David. There's something we really need to know. It's our readers who want to know this. They want to know, isn't mathematics taking the passion out of the game? Like, all the fans, they don't want to know all about this statistics. Mathematics, football is all about passion. Aren't you taking the passion out of the game by doing it mathematically? And I would be, no, look at this heat map. It's really exciting. Do you want to see a passing network? And they go, oh, okay, yeah, that's fine. Okay, we'll write that, no problem, okay. But I began to have those feelings myself, that maybe I was taking the passion out of things by producing mathematical models. And here's another place where they're very passionate about algorithms. And another opportunity I got in writing Socomatics was to go to Google here in London, and talk about the mathematics of football. And they were just as enthusiastic as me, if not even more enthusiastic. They were, can't we put heart rate monitors on them so we can monitor them like 24 hours a day, and so you know where they're moving around, and then on the pitch we can have like hundreds of cameras and GPS and all of this stuff. And they just thought this was brilliant. There was no one there that thought they were losing the passion in the game. And what Google are doing, and it's not just Google, but Facebook also and Microsoft, is they want to try and use algorithms and mathematics to understand every part of the world that we live in. And what they were talking about at Google, for example, was using medical records to predict when you have liver disease. They're using techniques to improve energy efficiency. They've also done a lot of work on artificial intelligence, showing how you can solve games using artificial intelligence. There's all this research going on at Google, all enthusiastically trying to, in their view, make the world a better place by using mathematics and algorithms. And I think that's good, but there are problems here. There can be problems with algorithms. And a lot of people are worried about algorithms, and I suppose I hadn't had those worries before. But I want to start by identifying what I think is the biggest problem with algorithms. And you can already see it directly in the Banksy study. So this is an interview with one of the spatial statisticians who did the study of Banksy. And he said this: it rapidly became apparent that there is only one serious suspect, and everyone knows who it is. If you Google Banksy, and I didn't want to put the name of suspect, you get something like 43,500 hits. And I'm sure that number of hits has increased since then. But they already knew who Banksy was. And the reason they knew who Banksy was not because of any mathematics. It was because the Daily Mail are obsessed with finding out who Banksy is. So for over the last 12 years, the Daily Mail have written hundreds of articles about who Banksy might be and identified various different suspects, and they've come up with one very good suspect. I had some fun finding Daily Mail headlines about Banksy. So this is, "Scrapyard boss thinks he's filmed the elusive Banksy in his Mercedes van." And then, "Banksy's caught red-handed." This one is my favorite. Graffiti artist Banksy unmasked as a former public schoolboy from middle-class suburbia. Totally shocking that he's not a working-class hero that our graffiti artist should be. And then, of course, the Mail picked up on the Spatial Statisticians article. They wrote, "Scientists confirm Mail on Sunday got Banksy's identity right." And it's here you can see the problem. The spatial statisticians got their information about who Banksy was from the Daily Mail. The Daily Mail then write a headline saying that scientists confirm Mail on Sunday got Banksy's identity right. And it's this feedback between the people who are, the people who are doing the research and the people who are managing to do the investigative journalism, where they confirm each other, but they haven't really confirmed each other. Where did they get the original idea? It's not necessarily the algorithms that found Banksy. So that tells you there's a limitation in if the algorithm really did find Banksy. But then you see in the scientific article, they wrote the following statement. They said that this supports previous suggestions that analysis of minor terrorism-related acts, e.g. graffiti, could be used to help locate terrorist bases before more serious incidences occur. Now, this was written in a scientific paper, and this is really scary, right? So what if we find that there's been some sort of graffiti written about, that we should assume that these people are going to do terrorist acts, and we should start to arrest anybody who's done some graffiti, and we can track them all down with these algorithms. And the point I missed on the previous slide was this algorithm said that if you look at the white areas, about 20% of Londoners are potential terrorists. So that is a bit of a scary thought. And I don't want to be too hard on the scientists, because I think scientists, well, I write scientific papers too, and sometimes we do get a bit carried away and draw conclusions that we shouldn't have done. But what's really important here is how these algorithms work, and that ended up being a lot of what I spent some time investigating. Where I wanted to start, when I investigated algorithms, I analyzed 3 different steps. First, I looked at how they analyze us, then I looked at how they influence us, and then I looked at how they might eventually become us. And I'm going to start with the part about how they analyze us. And what I wanted to start with, in order to really understand how these things worked, I actually started by analyzing myself. So this is my Facebook page. I've revealed it now to the world. The picture there is slightly old. That's of, my daughter is now 15. She's the small one there. And my son is now 13, so I don't carry him around on that baby Björn anymore. And so it's not really up to date. I'm not a big Facebook user, but I noticed that lots of my friends are big Facebook users. So this gives me a great opportunity to analyze some people's data. So what I did, you're probably all glad, well, some of you are my Facebook friends, actually. You're probably glad that you're not my Facebook friends now, because what I did is I took my Facebook friends and I put them into a matrix. And what you see here, these are a list of 30 of my Facebook friends. This one's my wife who's sitting there. The others aren't present, so that's good. No, I'm joking. I have asked for some of their permissions anyway. And what's shown here is different categories which they post about. So what I did is I took all of the posts that they made and I categorized them to see what they were about. So here we have Camilla. She posted 5 times about work. She posted 1 thing about a product of advertising, 1 time about culture and sport. And for every person, I noted the number of times they posted about different things. And what I wanted to do was see if I could break down and understand my friends in the way an algorithm would break down and understand my friends. And my aim was to reduce them to 2 dimensions. And so I used a technique called principal component analysis, where you basically rotate all of the data around, and you try to find the best way of looking at that data. And you try and reduce it down into this two-dimensional picture of the data. And the two-dimensional picture I got of my friends looked like this. So what we could see is that there was two axes. One of the axes was a public versus personal axis. I had some friends who posted a lot about their friends and their family. They're over here. I had lots of friends who posted mainly about either work or what they did, or they posted about news and current affairs and so on. And so the work people could be put up here, and the current affairs people could be put down here. So there was two axes: workplace further up, culture further down, public further to the left, personal further to the right. Now, the important thing here is that this isn't my classification of my friends. This is the classification I get by taking my friends, putting their posts into an algorithm, and asking the algorithm what is the best way to view David's friends. And the answer it came up with isn't unreasonable. Afterwards, I asked these friends, is this a good classification of you? Do you use Facebook mostly in this way? Do you use it mostly for your family? And they agreed that this was a very good analysis of how they behaved on Facebook. So a simple algorithm, this principal component analysis, could break down my friends to two dimensions and could understand and break them down into groups. So that's how the basic algorithm works, that's how it works on my friends. This is what happens for Facebook. This is how Facebook see the world. They have all of the world, 2 billion people, on one axis. Then they have 100 million likes of various different things on another axis. And their task is to reduce this massive, massive matrix of data to some form of understanding of all the people around the world. I love some of these categories. There's so many of them. You know, we've got Feminist Peace Network, Rick Rolling, Big Butts and I Cannot Lie. Every type of category of anything you can find, people are sitting there and they're just clicking like on everything that they supposedly like and filling up a matrix for Facebook of what all different types of people like. Now, we can't expect all of these 100 million likes just to be reduced down to two dimensions. So what Facebook do is they reduce it down to tens of thousands of dimensions. So they take these 2 million people and they reduce them to tens of thousands of advertising categories. And you can actually go into Facebook yourself. It just takes a few minutes to find out what type of advertising categories they have. Some of them, I thought, it's the royal wedding. I know I've been upstaged my arrival here by the royal wedding on Saturday. So I took a few ones that I thought would be quite nice for the royal wedding. So the size of these is proportional to how many people are accurately classified by them. So about 60 million people around the world are interested in the British royal family. I didn't think about this, but 60 million, that's the population of the UK, isn't it? So you're all obsessed with the British royal family. But 60 million people around the world are interested in the British royal family. There's about 5 million people who Facebook have classified as upper middle class for some reason. Britpop has 40 million people. So there's 40 million people that Facebook have labeled as Britpop. And then there wasn't one for the upcoming wedding, but there was a category for people interested in the wedding of Prince William and Catherine Middleton. And there was about 20 million people or so who were classified in that way. And those categories are inside Facebook, you can take them out and have a look at them. I think these categories we recognize, we understand what they mean, but there are other categories which are a little bit more difficult to understand. So these are 4 of my favorites. Toast, tugboat, neck, platypus. Toast, I think I found out actually my son is probably in the toast category. He sees a lot of adverts for bread products when he's playing computer games. They've made some correlation between computer game playing and having a sandwich after you finish playing a computer game. And I think probably my son would be in the toast category. Tugboat, I just have no idea why. And that's like 10 million people or something are in the tugboat category. Neck, that could be back pain and so on. That's a 70 million category. And then platypus, that's a couple of million people are in the category platypus. Now, of course, these categories are funny, but in a sense, the joke is on us, because there's 10,000 categories there, and they are a genuine statistical understanding of us as individuals. So just because we don't understand why they've classified us as platypus doesn't mean that there isn't a genuine statistical relationship which is best characterized by the word platypus. So when we always want to put words on things to describe things, but actually inside the Facebook computer, there's no words, there's just these dimensions. And one of those dimensions is best described in words as platypus. And I think we can, so Facebook understands us in 10,000 dimensions. We understand each other, we tend to understand each other in terms of maybe our gender, our race, our class, and maybe to some degree we understand each other in terms of personality. We talk about each other's personality. This is the way that psychologists understand us. They have come up with one of the theories that's predominant in psychology is this idea of the Big Five personality model. These are openness, conscientiousness, extravagance, agreeableness, and neuroticism. So it's ocean. And this has become, over the last 30 years or so, this has become quite a standard model that people use to, that psychologists use to classify people. And that means that they're working in 5 dimensions. So they take questionnaires where you fill in maybe 100 questions. These might be questions, there are questions about yourself, about how other people perceive you. And they take those questionnaires, they reduce the number of dimensions to 5, and then they can tell you on those 5 axes what is your personality. Now, this guy here, Mikael Kaczynski, when he was a PhD student at Cambridge University, he came up with what can only be described as a genius idea. He came up with the following idea. He knew all about Facebook and all the likes that were going on there. And Facebook had just started, so this was 2007. There wasn't very much to do on Facebook in 2007. So he came up with the idea of making an app where you could do a personality test. And if you did the personality test, you would get the result and it would tell you you're neurotic or you're agreeable or something like that. And this would be a fun thing to do. So these are the questions that he'd ask. Do you have a vivid imagination? You could fill in, do you hold a grudge, and so on. You filled in these 100 questions. And then at the end of it, this was the smartest part, he said, would it be okay if we had access to all of your social media data for research purposes? And everyone was just like, yeah, that sounds great. Yeah, that'll be fine. Okay, there you go. And 4 or 5 years later, he had several million people's personalities. They also answered questions about their gender, their smoking habits, their sexual orientation, everything that he asked them, they just happily clicked in. And he had this massive database of personality and how what people liked on Facebook. Then he came up with this really clever idea and this was a paper that came out in 2015. This is the personality of various people on these 5 dimensions. These are the Facebook likes of various people on tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands dimensions. You can take both of those matrices and you can link them together by creating a statistical model. So he took these and he could predict the personalities, or he fitted a model which predicted personalities based on the likes that people have made. And once you fitted the model, you can start to predict on other people. So when us mathematicians do something like this, we take 90% of the data to fit the model, to try and understand people. We then take the rest, the 10% that's left, we take that and we try to predict if we could actually get people's personalities right. And it turned out he could get people's personalities right. And this is some of the examples. So people who are outgoing, they like dancing, theater, and beer pong. I actually still don't know what beer pong is. I have to find out. It's really important if you're a student in America or an outgoing student in America. If you're shy, so this is really, I'm sorry, but this is a list of painful stereotypes. So if you're shy, you like anime, you like role-playing games, and you like Terry Pratchett books. If you're neurotic, you like Kurt Cobain, you like the emo lifestyle, and you say, sometimes I hate myself. So, yeah. And if you're calm, this was a bit of a surprise for me. If you're calm, you like skydiving. I mean, I suppose you have to be quite calm if you're going to jump out of a plane. You like football, so yeah, I'm in that category. And you like business administration. See, one of the points here is you don't have to like all of these things at the same time. Or yeah, you certainly don't do all of these things at the same time. But those are the types of signals of somebody who is calm, neurotic, shy, or outgoing. Now, this work by Michael Kosinski, it caught the attention of the following person. This is Alexander Nix, and he was, until recently, CEO for a company called Cambridge Analytica, which probably a lot of people have heard of, or it's very hard not to have heard of them. And he gave a presentation in 2016. He was working then on the Ted Cruz campaign. For the presidential primaries, and he then later went on to work with Donald Trump when Cruz dropped out of the campaign. And in this presentation, he made a very powerful prediction of how they could use Facebook data. His idea was, well, we can actually predict the personalities of different people. And that's going to be really powerful in an election. So if you can identify the personality of a neurotic person, and that person might be interested in voting for the Republicans, and you might take up an issue of guns, then you can say, neurotic person, it's like, protect your family with a gun. And then if you find the person isn't neurotic, maybe they're a more traditional person, you can say, hand your gun down from father to son. And these become the different targeted adverts. You take their personality and you target that personality with a particular advert. That was the sort of dream that Alexander Nix presented for Cambridge Analytica. And you can see sort of why they ended up getting into trouble later, because this wasn't exactly the sort of thing that everybody thought was a brilliant idea. But what I've actually found out when I was writing the book Outnumbered is this is really scary. What Nix does present, this idea of targeting personality, it's scary, but the problem is it doesn't work. And this is the reason it doesn't work. So this is a small subset of the data used by Michael Kosinski. And what's plotted here is neuroticism measured in a psychological test. So that's when you do this ocean test, you fill in the questionnaire. And what's here is neuroticism predicted by Facebook data. And each of these dots is one of 100 people from the original study, but the model is actually fitted on tens of thousands of people. It's not just fitted on these 100 people, but they illustrate it here. And you can see, if you look carefully, there is a trend in this data. And there's a correlation coefficient here of 0.3. So for a scientist, that's enough to say there is a statistically significant trend here. And that's where Michael Kosinski could quite rightly publish a good scientific article claiming a relationship between these two variables. There is a trend that goes like that. Slightly more often, people who have low neuroticism have a low score, and high neuroticism have a high score. But there's lots of exceptions to this rule. Here are a bunch of people who Facebook thinks are neurotic, but when they do a neuroticism test, aren't neurotic at all. And here are a bunch of people who Facebook thinks are not neurotic, but when you do a psychology test on them, they're very neurotic. So there's a scientifically reliable result, but that isn't enough to actually build an algorithm to identify people's personalities. And so I found that personality algorithms, they just don't work. So what you can do, if you know Republicans and you know Democrats, you can reliably predict a Republican and a Democrat. Democrats tend to follow Barack Obama, for example, Hillary Clinton. So you can identify them. And there are some subtle things as well. Democrats love Harry Potter for some reason, and Republicans aren't so keen on Harry Potter. So there's a few subtle things you might not have thought about. Republicans apparently love to go camping, and they like camping a lot more than Democrats. So there's some good signals there to pick out your Republicans and your Democrats. But it predicts more neurotic or less neurotic people only with 60% accuracy. So if I picked out 2 random people in this audience, looked at their Facebook pages, and tried to predict with my algorithm which of you is most neurotic, I'd have about a 60% chance of getting it right. And of course, if I just said randomly, oh, you're the most neurotic one, I'd have a 50% chance of getting it right. So it isn't particularly accurate algorithm. It's scientifically, it's statistically sound, but it's not enough to build an algorithm. Then there's another problem, is this protect your family with a gun thing that I'm so keen on. Is protecting your family with a gun neurotic is very different from Nirvana emo lifestyle neurotic. I mean, you don't go up to a Nirvana fan and say, protect your family with a gun. It's just not going to work. They're not going to respond to that thing. So the personality, there's a lot of subtleties to personalities which aren't captured by these types of algorithms. Now, when I started working and investigating Cambridge Analytica, there'd been quite a few articles in the newspaper already, but I started about a year ago looking at whether their algorithms really work. I'd read a few of the Guardian articles about it, and I started looking into it. But then, in March, this story really broke on a massive level, and it broke when Chris Wiley came out and said that he was the whistleblower. He was the guy behind Cambridge Analytica, or was involved with the development of their algorithm. And he revealed all the documents about how the inner workings of Cambridge Analytica. Now, I think it's brilliant that he revealed all of these inner workings, but I do have a problem with this headline. I made Steve Bannon's psychological warfare tool. Now, this warfare tool, or this weapon that he created, it can't have been a particularly powerful weapon because it's based on exactly the principles that we've talked about. It has all of the limitations that we've talked about before. It is going to misidentify people. It's like a sort of random targeting weapon that will go out and do a lot of random stuff and influence people in lots of different ways. But it isn't a sort of dangerous psychological profiling weapon that they might have thought that they were creating. If anybody did create a psychological warfare weapon, it was this person here. This person is Alex Kogan. He also worked at Cambridge University, and he was a colleague of Mikael Kaczynski's, and he was the person who created the app which downloaded all of the data for the Cambridge Analytica study. And he also tried to fit the statistical model. That's often less reported. He tried to fit the statistical model to the data. Now, Kogan, I approached him quite early on to try and talk to him about things, and he wasn't very keen on talking to me at all. He'd been accused of being a Russian spy and vilified in all sorts of different ways on various blogs and so on. And so he really just didn't want to talk to me. But then I told him about my research into the efficiency of algorithms, and suddenly he was extremely excited to talk to me because he said, that's exactly what happened. We collected in all of this data, and it just didn't work. We got terrible results. And in fact, Mikael Kaczynski's data set was bigger than the data set they had, so they didn't even get as good results as him. And so he was talking about correlation levels of 0.1, so extremely bad results. And he told me that he thought that Alexander Nix, the head of Cambridge Analytica, he just had very little comprehension of what he was talking about, he told me. He's trying to promote the personality algorithm because he has a strong financial incentive to tell a story about how Cambridge Analytica have a secret weapon. So this was the guy who tried to create the psychological warfare tool and had now come to believe there was no way that he could create a psychological warfare tool. One of the issues I have is about how these sorts of things are reported in the media, because this is how Kosinski's original paper was reported in the media. How Facebook knows you better than your friends. Okay, that's fair enough. Facebook knows you better than your members of your own family? Then this one's my favorite. New York Times, Facebook knows you better than anybody else. And so you just got this going to extremes of how well Facebook understood you. And really the result was you have a correlation of 0.3 between a personality test and a principal component decomposition of your Facebook likes. So it really wasn't a relationship of anything close to this level. And what's similar, I think, between the Banksy story I told you at the start and this story is that there's a scientifically interesting result, but there isn't a thing that you can later turn into an algorithm which actually affects people. And that turned out to be the case for a lot of the different algorithms I looked at. I'm going to tell you a couple more stories shortly, but it always turned out that the algorithms, the scientific results, didn't quite translate into the algorithms that might affect our lives. So algorithms try to influence us, and you probably can't have escaped, if you've heard about Cambridge Analytica, you can't have escaped hearing a lot about fake news. So the other big thing about the Trump election was fake news. So here's four pieces of fake news. So Clinton Foundation staff were found guilty of diverting funds to buy alcohol for expensive parties in the Caribbean. Mike Pence said that Michelle Obama is the most vulgar first lady we've ever had. Leaked documents reveal that the Trump campaign planned a scheme to offer to drive Democratic voters to the polls, but then take them to the wrong place. At a rally a few days before the election, President Obama screamed at a protester who supported Donald Trump. Now, does anyone remember any of these fake news stories? Well, not too many people, but these are all fake news stories about the election, but there's actually a difference between them. Two of these fake news stories are, if you can really call them this, they're real fake news stories. Two of them are fake news stories. So two of these stories were made up by researchers to show to people as a placebo treatment in a fake news experiment. And I'll show you which ones are which. The top one is a fake news story. It was made up by researchers, as is the third one. And then there's two here. These are real fake news stories that actually appeared on Facebook and on various websites. And what the economists who studied this did, it was a really clever experiment. They showed both the real fake news stories to people, and they showed them the fake news stories, and they showed them some true news stories too. And here are the results. So if they showed them a big true story, they would usually remember the story. If this is like very true stories that were big in the news. These are small true stories, minor news items. They'd often remember them. But over here, this is the fake news stories, and about 15% of people said that they remembered a fake news story. But 14% of people said they remembered a fake news story. And there's no statistical significance difference there. Basically, people couldn't tell the difference between fake news and real fake news. And so the possibility, although fake news spreads a lot and people are sharing this stuff all the time, nobody can remember it. They remember the sort of vague idea of the content of it, but they can't remember the details of it. I've looked at a few other things, and this is the echo chamber effect. Now, I found, to my great relief, that it turns out that I don't live in an echo chamber. Well, maybe everybody maybe says that, but I did a study to see if I did live in an echo chamber. This is me in the center here on Twitter. And all of these circles here are the people I follow, and they follow me back on Twitter. So we talk to each other on Twitter. And what the coloring is, it shows if they were closer to following a pro-Brexit newspaper or a pro-Remain newspaper. So darker people were more pro-Remain, and whiter people were more pro-Brexit. Now up here, this is an echo chamber. This is a cluster of people who I follow and follow me back and follow each other. These people are all scientists, and they tend to be, there's one exception here, one contrarian of course, but nearly most of them tend to be pro-Remain. And they are kind of an echo chamber, but they're an echo chamber in a really nice way. It's just moaning about getting your paper rejected and those sorts of things. So they're a nice echo chamber, I think. But it turns out I've got lots of non-echo chamber connections. I've got connections which go in lots of different directions, and some of those people are quite on the pro-Brexit side of the newspapers that they follow. So there is this opportunity to get in different information. And myself and a student, we did a study. Of course, I can't base a whole scientific theory just on my own Twitter graph. So we downloaded lots of different people during the Brexit, just after the Brexit vote, and we found that this was very typical of the structure. They'll have this group of people who maybe are in a bit of echo chamber, but they have all of these nice links that go out to different places where they get different types of opinions coming into them. So most of us really don't live in an echo chamber. In fact, Facebook were very quick out to do a research of this. I mean, you can or you can't trust Facebook's research, but it was published in the best scientific journal in the world, Science. And what they showed is that people tend to be exposed to, these are conservative people, so Republicans. This is if they took their news at random, they would get 40% liberal type of news, and they get 35% liberal type of news. So conservatives see a lot of news which disagrees with their point of view. Liberals, they tend to be in a little bit more of an echo chamber. Liberals see more liberal news than they see conservative news, and that's because they share liberal news with each other. So they don't see as much conservative news as if they just pick stories at random. So most of us don't live in an echo chamber, although if you're a liberal, then you're slightly more likely to live in a bit more of an echo chamber than the typical conservative person in general. I don't want to overplay that, because my overall point is that most of us don't live in much of an echo chamber. Okay, so finally, I just want to say one last thing about the last part of the book I wrote. I spent a lot of time talking to researchers who were looking at artificial intelligence, so both at Facebook and Google, and for some reason, artificial intelligence research seems to be blue. So when I went into their website, all of their logos were blue. So blue is the color of artificial intelligence. And all of these places are working on artificial intelligence. And I think, I'm tempted to tell you that you have to go and read the book in order to find out the risks of artificial intelligence. What I did is I downloaded a lot of the tools that they use, and I went through them one by one and tried to work out how intelligent are these tools. And yeah, they weren't that smart, or they're not as smart as maybe a lot of people think they are. A lot of them are mathematical methods that we've known about for some time, applied in a new type of way. And it's quite fun to find out the limitations of these types of artificial intelligence. I'm one of the people who believes that general artificial intelligence is a long, long way off. I want to finish by saying, because I've moaned a lot about Facebook and Google and so on, I want to just finish by telling you about three of the good guys in these stories. This was a person who really impressed me. This is Julia Dressel. She's an undergraduate student at Dartmouth College, And what she did as her undergraduate project is she deconstructed an algorithm called Compass, which is used in sentencing decisions or parole decisions in the United States. And she actually managed to do an experiment where she compared how this algorithm worked with just how members of the public answered these same sentencing questions. They got hardly any information. They just got the basic description of the crime and had to make a sentencing decision. And the algorithm came up with very similar recommendations. So she summarized her main findings for me. She said, what I found was that a major commercial software that is widely used to predict recidivism, that's reoffending, is no more accurate or fair than the predictions of people with little to no criminal justice expertise who responded to an online survey. So this sophisticated computer model was no better than a bunch of randomly recruited mechanical Turkers who were paid $1 to do this task. This is another person who I met, who I had a lot of respect for. This is Glenn MacDonald, and any of you use Spotify, you use Glenn's algorithm. He is the guy who decomposed the whole of music and created music genres which Spotify used to tell you what you're going to listen to next. And he was an amazing person to talk to. He was really kind of emotionally involved with the music that he listened to. And because of his emotional involvement with the music, he told me that when he was in a startup and Spotify bought this startup, and when Spotify bought it, he asked to be called a data alchemist instead of a data scientist, because he sees his job not as searching for abstract truths about musical styles, but as providing classifications that make sense to people. This process requires humans and computers to work together. So that was very much how he emphasized it for me. You shouldn't think of it as data science. You should think of it as some form of data alchemy that's going on in a lot of these companies. And finally, I wanted to say a little bit about Joanna Brayson. She did a study breaking down gender differences in how we use languages. So she took Google's algorithm for classifying languages, and she did things like the following thing. So my name's David. Of my generation, the most popular female name is Susan. If you try and find out inside this algorithm where we're closest to, it turns out that I'm much closer to the word intelligent than Susan is, and Susan is much closer to the word resourceful than I am. And those are inbuilt gender biases inside these algorithms. But she was very interesting because she was very skeptical about artificial intelligence, and I thought it would be nice to end my own presentation on what she said, because I thought back to what she'd told me, and I'd asked her about the rise of algorithms and whether she thought they would become as smart as us. And she told me I was asking the wrong question. We've already exceeded human intelligence in so many ways. Our culture has produced forms of mathematical artificial intelligence for solving problems for thousands of years, from the early geometry of the Babylonians and the Egyptians, through the development of calculus by Newton and Leipzig, through the hand calculator allowing us to perform faster arithmetic, to the modern computer, the connected society, and our present-day algorithmic world. And I think it's that thought that I'll leave you on. Thank you.